Welcome back. We start from Israeli forces, which have wounded 41 Palestinians protesting against US President Donald Trump's Middle East peace deal across the West Bank. Palestine Red Crescent Society said Israeli forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets. It said the demonstrators were wounded in the towns of Tulkaram, Al-Bereh and Urub refugee camp and in villages north of the Jordan Valley. The protesters chanted slogans against the plan, saying, "Palestine is not for sale." Hundreds of Palestinian refugees took to the streets of Beirut and Lebanon to protest against Trump's deal. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will visit the UN within 2 weeks to address the Security Council on his rejection of the new plan. Meanwhile, Israeli warplanes have bombed multiple locations in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says its jets struck Hamas posts in southern city of Khan Yunis and the central city of Deir al-Balah. Security officials said 2 successive airstrikes were carried out in retaliation for rocket launches from within the strip. They said a rocket was fired from Gaza into Israel. No casualties have been reported so far. The attack came shortly after Israel announced it would step up its military presence in the West Bank and near Gaza. In a related development, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has urged Palestinians to produce a counteroffer to the Trump peace plan that can win Israeli support. Talking to reporters, Pompeo said Palestinian leaders are free to come up with an appropriate counteroffer. He said Israelis would be prepared to sit down and negotiate on the basis of the president's vision. Palestinians have been protesting against Trump's peace plan, which gives Israel a green light to annex key parts of the occupied West Bank. In the West Bank city of Bethlehem, Israeli border guards fired tear gas at demonstrators. In a devastating news, the death toll from the new coronavirus sweeping China has now risen to 170. With a confirmed case in Tibet, the virus has now spread to every region in mainland China and at least 20 other countries. More in this report.
As China wrestles with the coronavirus, over 1,000 new cases of the disease have emerged in the past 24 hours, making a total number of 7,700. The World Health Organization meets today to decide if the disease is serious enough to warrant a global health emergency. The international health body says despite a small number of cases outside China, the virus has the potential for a far larger outbreak.
But the whole world needs to be on alert now. The whole world needs to take action and be ready for any cases that come, either from the original epicenter or from other epicenters that become established.
The EU says nearly 600 European citizens in China want to be repatriated. It said all member states want to bring their citizens home. The bloc says they can't put hundreds of people on one plane without screening them first.
What is specific about this virus is that these are complex operations. You don't now send a plane to Wuhan, you load up the people and you go back home. You have to screen the people. You don't want a plane with 200 people and one of them is infected and infects everybody else on the flight back. When they come back, you have to have quarantine facilities.
Starbucks and Tesla have closed their outlets and offices in the country. They are joined by Google, which has shut its offices because of the outbreak.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has set up an emergency center at the Ministry of Health to prevent coronavirus from entering and spreading in the country. In a press briefing, the Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said a high-powered committee is considering steps to protect citizens. She said Pakistan is in touch with China to ensure the safety of its citizens. Farooqi said opening of Punjab border with China has been rescheduled. Spokesperson said due to coronavirus, the border will now be opened in April and not in February. In China, Beijing streets and shopping malls are empty as the coronavirus outbreak overshadows Chinese New Year celebrations. Over 2,000 stores in the country have already been closed because of the epidemic. More in this report.
The week-long Lunar New Year holiday usually sees audiences flooding into cinemas and people with their families crowding into tourist sites. This year is different. Public areas, including every tourist trap, have been closed by fears of the infectious coronavirus. Starbucks now has signs asking customers to wear a mask before entering the cafe.
And now I have to go back early to my home. And I couldn't even see the places that I wanted. Like I really wanted to see the Great Wall and I won't be able to see it. And it's my first time here in Asia and I feel very unlucky.
Another worry is the economy, with residents and investors alike concerned by the economic hit the disease will cause. It's believed output could be reduced and businesses at every level undermined by travel restrictions introduced by the government to slow the spread of the virus.
I am sure it will affect the national economy. It's during the Spring Festival and it's in the holiday season. However you see, there are not many people on the streets in Beijing. I feel the impact will be extremely big. Therefore, I hope people in Hubei will stop eating wild animals and food without inspection. I think it's a disaster.
170 people have lost their lives so far as the virus spreads its reach across China and into at least 16 other countries.
Pakistan's army has killed 5 terrorists in operation in Datakhel town of North Waziristan. Army's media wing says 2 army soldiers, Mohammad Shamim and Asad Khan, were martyred during the operation. Inter-Services Public Relations said the operation was conducted on intelligence information. The U.S. Department of Defense has identified its 2 airmen killed in a military plane crash in Afghanistan. On Monday, the Taliban claimed shooting down the Bombardier E-11A used by U.S. forces for battlefield communications. Pentagon said 46-year-old Colonel Paul Voss, who previously served Virginia Air Command headquarters, was among the dead. It said the second airman was 30-year-old Captain Ryan Fanoff from Hudson, New Hampshire. The Pentagon said the men were supporting Operation Freedom Sentinel for the U.S. mission in Afghanistan. In India, an unidentified man has opened fire at a rally protesting against the controversial citizenship law in New Delhi. In a video, a man can be seen opening fire at the protesters, shouting, "Here is your freedom." The incident happened after radical outfit Hindu Sena threatened to remove Anti-Citizenship Act protesters in Delhi by force. In a statement, Hindu Sena President Vishnu Gupta said they will remove what he said jihadists on 2nd February by force. Gupta said his party has told allies and people from nearby villages to gather near the protesting site. The Shaheen Bagh's all-women sit-in has continued since December 16, calling the law discriminatory against Muslims. A New York-based committee to protect journalists has denounced India's claim of restoring internet in occupied Kashmir. Last week, New Delhi restored 2G internet in the valley after 6 months with access to only 300 whitelist websites. In a statement, the committee said, the New Delhi's claim is a complete farce. It said all news websites are still blocked and journalists do not have the right speed and quality of the internet for the work. It said India's curb on internet services is a complete disregard for the right to freedom of speech. The committee demanded complete restoration of the internet immediately. US President Donald Trump's Senate impeachment trial has entered the questioning phase. Taking turns by party, senators have submitted written questions for both Trump's legal team and the trial's Democratic managers.
The questioning comes before a vote later in the week on whether to call witnesses, including ex-National Security Advisor John Bolton. Senior Republicans have refused to allow any witnesses or new evidence while they push for a speedy acquittal of a president who wants a second term. Democrats see the White House decision to prevent Bolton from testifying as unfair and are looking for 4 Republican votes to call witnesses.
There's no way to have a fair trial without witnesses. And when you have a witness who is as plainly relevant as John Bolton, who goes to the heart of the most serious and egregious of the president's misconduct, who has volunteered to come and testify, to turn him away, to look the other way, I think is deeply at odds with being an impartial juror.
The president is charged with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress for withholding aid to Ukraine for political gain.
Tensions seem to be mounting between US and Russia as the US has issued fresh sanctions on Russia over its annexation of Crimea. The US Treasury Department has blacklisted 8 individuals and a Moscow-based railway company. In a statement, the department said it blacklisted Crimea's pro-Russian Prime Minister Yuri Gotsenyuk. It said the Grand Service Express that operates in Crimea has also been sanctioned. The Treasury Department said the individuals were being sanctioned by both Canada and the EU. The Russian embassy in Washington says the sanctions will not make Moscow change its policies. It said the curbs will only erode the basis for bilateral cooperation. The Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly has voted to fully restore rights of the Russian delegation. Officials say 96 lawmakers voted in favor, while 44 voted against the move and 7 abstained from voting. The draft resolution says the Assembly wants to assess the progress made until PESCO rapporteurs visit Russia. The PACE noted Russia has fulfilled some recommendations included in the resolution for its return to the body. The measures included Moscow's participation in prisoner swaps with Ukraine and progress towards Minsk agreements. Members of the PACE drafted the resolution in June last year. Russia has rejected UN Secretariat's data on civilian casualties in Syria's Idlib province. This comes after UN Under-Secretary General Mark Lowcock accused Syria's government and its allies of killing civilians in airstrikes. At the UN Security Council meeting last night, Britain and the US accused Russia and China of cutting humanitarian aid for millions of Syrians. Denying the accusations, Russia's representative to the UN, Vasily Nobenzia, said the source of UN data on Syrian casualties is unknown. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry claims no civilians were affected in the attack by Syrian government forces against militants in Idlib. It said they are working in the town of Marat al-Numan, retaken from militants, to provide civilians with food and daily necessities. The UN says truckloads of medical aid for civilians in Syria's northeast are stuck in Iraq. In a briefing at the Security Council, UN Aid Chief Mark Lowcock said nearly 400,000 units of medical equipment cannot cross the border. Lowcock said Secretary General Antonio Guterres has asked Council members for their support in solving the problem. He warned a shortage of medical supplies will create a disastrous health crisis in Syria. Earlier this month, the Council allowed cross-border aid operations to continue from 2 places in Turkey. It excluded crossing points from Iraq and Jordan because of Chinese and Russian reservations. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back to our news bulletin. Turkey says France is responsible for Libya's instability, accusing Paris of wanting to control Tripoli's natural resources. Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hami Aksoy said Paris has been supporting Libyan strongman Khalifa Haftar since 2011. Aksoy said France should stop backing Haftar if it wants to implement decisions taken at this month's Berlin conference. He said Haftar's attack on the legitimate government is a threat to the country's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The remarks came after French President Emmanuel Macron accused Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of ramping up interference in Libya. Macron claimed Turkish ships carrying Syrian mercenaries have been seen arriving on Libyan soil. Britain is preparing to leave the EU, while the bloc's Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier warned this week of the fresh risk of a cliff edge at the end of 2020. In the meantime, Northern Ireland violin maker Martin McLean is aware of the uncertainty that overshadows the province's trading status. More in this report.
Martin McLean strikes a cheerful tune in his Northern Ireland studio. But with Brexit days away, the violin maker is preparing to face the music. For a hefty fee, McLean makes instruments sought after the world over.
I make bespoke, high-end violins that are suitable for concert musicians. And I suppose what I'm doing is I'm recreating the sound that those famous violins like Stradivarius and Guarneri's and so on that they can produce, the sort of sound that can fill a concert hall and wow an audience and excite a musician.
Little will change in Northern Ireland on the day Britain leaves the EU. But after a year-long transition period, new custom checks are likely at ports like Warren Point. That's because Britain has promised Northern Irish regulations will stay aligned to the Irish Republic, while the rest of the UK could change its rules. And that's already worrying business owners like Martin.
I mean, I have a couple of wood dealers that will come and visit me 3 times a year, and I can sort through their stock and I can pick out the wood that I like the most. And I think that they're certainly of the view that that's not going to happen anymore. You know, that they're not going to be able to make that journey. So that's going to make it more expensive. You know, it will mean more travel and so on to buy materials.
The Northern Ireland Federation of Small Businesses say their clients remain concerned, as there's still little clarity on how controls will affect their members. The EU has also warned danger of a hard Brexit has not gone away.
If we have no agreement, it will not be business as usual and the statu quo. We have to face a risk of a cliff edge, in particular for trade.
With so much unclear for Martin, the only option is to play it by ear.
In Iran, demonstrators regularly burn US, Israeli and British flags during rallies and protests. As tensions between Tehran and Washington have grown, so has the business at Iran's largest flag factory. More about the unique company in this report.
At this factory in the town of Khomein, southwest of the capital of Tehran, young men and women print flags by hand and hang them to dry. At its busiest, the facility produces 2,000 US and Israeli flags a month. It makes over 1.5 million square feet of flags each year.
We have no problem with the American and British people. We have a problem with our governors. We have a problem with their presidents, with the wrong policy that they have.
The assassination of Iran's leading military commander, Qasem Soleimani, has once again brought out anti-American sentiments.
Compared to the cowardly actions of the United States, such as General Qasem Soleimani's assassination, this burning an American flag is a minimal thing against them. This is the least that can be done.
This is not always the case. At protests, when Tehran confessed to shooting down a Ukraine passenger plane, young demonstrators refused to run over the American flag painted on the street in Tehran.
Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai has joined over 2,000 activists to declare a state of emergency for people and the planet. The declaration is part of an open letter addressed to world leaders who signed up to the UN's program to tackle poverty, inequality, and climate change by 2030. The advocates are demanding urgent action to deal with global-scale problems and conditions they say are only getting worse. Along with Yousafzai, environmentalist Jane Goodall and screenwriter Richard Curtis are among the signatories. The letter was coordinated by Project Everyone, co-founded by Curtis to raise awareness of global development goals. The American aerospace company SpaceX has launched its 4th batch of 60 Starlink satellites. This is the second part of its 2020 push to put 1,500 satellites into orbit by the end of the year.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition, liftoff.
A sooty Falcon 9 rocket roared to life, lifting off from Space Launch Complex at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. The rocket carried 60 more Starlink satellites for SpaceX's growing constellation. The satellites all successfully deployed to low Earth orbit about an hour after liftoff. Last May, SpaceX launched the first batch of operational satellites. There are now 240 circling the Earth. SpaceX eventually wants to fly humans to the International Space Station.
Right, and yes.
In a positive development, the Pakistani government is holding a 2-day conference in Kenya in a major trade outreach to Africa. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has already arrived in Nairobi to attend Pakistan-Africa Trade Development Conference being held on Thursday and Friday. Earlier, in a statement, the Foreign Office said commerce and foreign ministries are hosting the conference that will strengthen economic ties between the two countries. It said Kenyan cabinet members, dignitaries from other African states, and Pakistani envoys in Africa will attend the conference. It said the move is part of Pakistan's Engage Africa initiative to forge closer ties with the African continent. Apple and its component supplier Broadcom have just been fined $1.1 billion for copyright infringement. A Los Angeles court has ordered them to pay the California Institute of Technology for breaking university patents. The Tech Research University alleged that Broadcom Wi-Fi chips in Apple iPhones violate patents on data transmission technology. Apple said it will appeal. In its court filings, the tech giant argued it used off-the-shelf Broadcom chips, but not the disputed component. Stock markets across Europe are trading lower over fears of a pandemic as coronavirus death toll surges. Investors have rushed to stockpile safe haven stocks after selling off major equity stocks. CAC 40 in Paris is trading nearly 1.5% lower ahead of major economic data set to be released later in the day. Frankfurt's DAX has also lost over 1% as shares of Germany's largest lender, Deutsche Bank, slipped 0.5%. London's FTSE 100 is trading 0.75% lower after BT Group shares fell 4.5%. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng led the losses, closing over 2.5% lower. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.